Ready, set, engage, episode 10. As each time I do the little disclaimer, the views expressed here represent mine and mine alone and do not reflect that of my employer or any organization that I'm affiliated with. I wanted to today talk about the word can't, right? I feel like we employ it a lot and we use it a lot, but I'm not sure that we're really digging into what the meaning is behind the word can't. It seems so simple, right? 4 letters, and it's I cannot is what you're saying. So maybe 6 letters total. But I don't think that it means there is no possible way. I think basically what we wind up saying, and I had to write it down so I remember it. I think the meaning of can't when we use it is generally, I've surmised that there exists a sufficient improbability of outcome that I've committed to not giving it a shot. And I think that sort of holds true in most scenarios I can think of. Now, there are extremes where, of course, you can't transcend the entire world, right? And that's probably fair. And you could probably say, well, I can't win the lotto, which is, there's sufficient probability that's that getting that $1 bajillion jackpot is probably unlikely, but in some of those cases it might be that you landed the wrong target, right? Like, is the lotto really what you want? You just your only goal in life is to win the lotto, and then what do you do with it, right? Well, I would guess that there's an underlying premise beneath that, and the underlying premise is probably, hey, I would like to worry less about bills, or to make a good amount of money so I can pursue some sort of dream or whatever. And those are very functional, right? If you start boiling it down to that, then I think there's a lot of opportunity to go and chase. There was a famous quote, and I won't remember who said it, but it went something like, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, in either case you're right, which is to say, if you have decided that you can't do something, you're going to find things that reassure you that you are correct. You will make it so you are incapable of doing something because your belief that you cannot do it. But all that is a rationalization, and then following your rationalization, right? So maybe change the paradigm. Ask whether or not you can do something. Instead, say, what are the things, if that's something I decide I want to pursue, and you don't have to pursue everything, but if that's something I want to pursue, what are the steps I need to take to get there, right? So there's the adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and to that I say, well, that's bullshit. You can. It might be a little bit harder than to teach a young dog. And I mean, it's not just dogs, right? Just behavior. Can you train a new behavior? And yes, you can. It may be hard to let go of your old behavior, but you can definitely train a new behavior. In childhood language development, basically, there's what's known as the language acquisition period, which is a period of a young child's life, generally from the age of 3 to about 7, where they are incredibly adept at learning language. And they can learn a language in the phonemes, right, which are the sound bits or the utterances that underlie what you're actually saying, the him, hum, min, ya, all the sort of vowel sounds and consonant combinations that exist within a dialect. They can learn that, and they can learn it even for a tongue that they don't necessarily speak, as long as they're exposed sufficiently to that dialect. And then later on in life, they can actually go back and learn that language, like actually learn the words to that language. And because they heard that phoneme or that pattern of phonemes enough as a child, they can actually learn the language without an accent. If you teach a child a language between the age of 3 to 7, they could pick it up and speak like a native of that dialect. If you wait until later in life, the majority of the time, people will wind up sounding like I think the term some people like to use is fob, right? Fresh off the boat. But you wind up having your language that's native to you sort of pollute your ability to speak like a native of this different dialect. You can learn the words, but the nuance of intonation just isn't there. And so you're still able to change and learn the behavior, but you have to work a lot harder to overcome the accent that you have. So you can't teach an old dog new tricks is false, just patently false. It's just going to be harder to break the existing behaviors that they built up over time. It's going to be harder to break those habits that they built up over time. And so if you have sufficient amount of habits that you've started storing and building over your lifetime, then yeah, to pick something that's totally antithetical to what you've done previously can be difficult, but it's not impossible. My wife likes to tell me, I'll pick up garbage when we go places. I think she's yelling at me from downstairs. I'll pick up garbage when we go places, right? And so we'll go on vacation, and I'll be picking up trash off the street, and every now and then she'll look at me and she'll go, "You can't save the world, you know," and that's fair, depending on how you class it and what steps, right? So what if the goal isn't to save the world? What if the goal is just to improve it a little bit? Well, I can accomplish that very easy, right? Every time I pick up a piece of trash that didn't make it to the garbage can, I'm improving it just that little bit. And as you make that a habit, well, now you're starting to have more and more impact over time, and you'll feel better about the impact. And so can I all of a sudden make all the trash in the world go away or magically find itself in a trash receptacle? Well, no, I can't. But I do have control over what I pick up and how often I'm able to try and make some small impact. And it's not earth-shattering, but it's important to me, right? So if I take that small impact and I increase the frequency, then over time it'll build up to be a fair amount of good that has been done, or a fair amount of change that I've made happen in the world. So the can't, right? I was thinking this morning, and I think somebody had a Facebook post, and it was, I don't even remember what it said. The basic premise was, well, Trump's an awful person because he can't fix our healthcare system. And so I was sort of thinking through that, and I'm like, well, he can't fix the healthcare system. Okay, well, how do we define the healthcare system, right? We could look at it as the current state of the U.S., and you could say, well, there's healthcare services, and then there's health insurance, and there's all sorts of layers to that, right? Which include pharmacy, they include the people at the service desk, the nurses that answer your stuff, the people that are manning the emergency room. There's a lot of stuff there, and so Trump can't fix the healthcare system. Well, I think that's right if you keep the game the same, right? But that doesn't mean it's an impossible thing. I don't think we have the approach right. That was the other thing. So we'll talk about FEMA for a minute. FEMA is under Department of Homeland Security, and when you talk about disaster response, basically the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for saying, oh yeah, the federal government should help out there. And so there's what's known as the Stafford Act, okay? And the Stafford Act is basically law that says the president is able to step in and help in declared disasters. But it also says that the federal government doesn't just step in and take everything over. Instead, what the Stafford Act does is it sets up this framework, and it says in order for the federal government to come in and help, there's a high number of things that need to happen. Basically, you have to assess how much things are going to cost. You have to figure out who's going to do the work. You have to take and declare an emergency, like the governor of the area has to declare an emergency. And so it sort of goes from state to, or city to state to county to, or county to state. And then at that point, you're supposed to get, I forget what the term is called, but basically states have a mutual aid clause. And so states in your region will actually are set up to try and help you, right? And there's emergency management staff from FEMA at that point. And then if it expands out of what the states in that area are able to do, then they can reach out for federal assistance. And federal assistance isn't usually sending a whole bunch of supplies and manpower. Instead, it expects that you have that infrastructure in the area. Instead, the federal government's job in that case, in the case of the Stafford Act, is to write a check, right? So basically, you have to solve all the problems or figure out how to solve the problems, and then tell the federal government, well, this is how I plan to do it. Here's my plan of attack. Here's how many resources. Here's how long it's going to take. Here's what I've already started. And now I need extra funding to be able to push it over the finish line. And that's when the federal government can step in. And so people look at Puerto Rico and they say, well, why hasn't the federal government just done it, right? Well, the problem is sort of efficacy of the money that's put into the system, right? If you have a high amount of loss on the money that's put into the system, then there might not be sufficient money there to actually make it work. Or if the people can't get a plan together that seems reasonable and cost effective, then do you overinvest and stretch yourself way too thin for a system that's not able to actually handle it meaningfully? And so I think the idea that the narrative or the story that winds up coming out is, well, the federal government's not helping and thus Trump doesn't care about people. Well, that's a drastic oversimplification in that you're probably not taking into account the Stafford Act, how that actually plays out, and the responsibilities of those locales in order to do that. In fact, I think there's been some examples where there's been some incredibly toxic conversations coming out of these places that could really use help. And it's unfortunate because it's sort of painting that narrative, right? That sort of duality of outcome of, well, we're right because we're hurting or suffering, and they're wrong because they're not doing anything. And now it sort of drives disparity instead of saying, hey, we should fix stuff together. How do we fix stuff together? Well, I'll do my part, you do yours, and then we'll try and work up to it. So efficiency and can't, okay? I can't fix a healthcare system that is currently in the US. I'm going to give you a secret. The government can't fix it either, at least not in a cost-efficient manner. And so we can look at extremes, right? We can look at the extremes that have showed up over the last couple of years. If I say Pharma Bro, then probably everyone will start thinking of Martin Shkreli, which is fine. But it's not just his problem, right? He was sort of the most egregious example, but it's sort of the inherent drive to our cultural philosophy. And the cultural philosophy is that of the achievers, right? The ones who have more, do more, get more respect, and so on, right? Like we honor the ones that stand out the most, and we pay them the most, and we listen to them the most, right? It doesn't mean that they have any smarter ideas, just that they're better at what they're doing and their ability to express those ideas. So the problem is that we're rewarding people for being the best, which is really good intent, but that also means that your singular focus and drive in a business is not to do the best good, but to be the best person or business or contributor, right? You're always in a competition, and the competition is for who can get the most profit or who can get the best outcome at the end of the day. And it's a cultural problem. It's not a legislative problem. It's literally our culture that is driving so much of this healthcare issue, right? So how do you fix it? How can you fix it? Well, the common narrative, well, if the government gives enough money and they just take over the system and they pay enough money in and cover the health insurance, then all of a sudden stuff will work. Is that correct? No, it's not. It's an approach, but it doesn't fix the issue, right? Because if we're perfectly oriented towards competitiveness and the amount of money we make or the paycheck we get, right, we start to create that drift. And so you can look at the drift, and you'll notice that it sort of exists everywhere inside of our society. But you can look at how much doctors get paid and say, wow, it seems that they're drifting, right? And so it's funny because it's sort of a snowball effect. That the more that one looks at their education as something that they had to suffer through and overcome, the more they feel that was justified and that that's a part of their value system. And then that starts to drive you away from people who haven't done that, because now I'm better than them because I invested this, because I spent this time, because I've done this stuff, right? And so it's sort of this natural thing where you're saying, well, I'm better, smarter, more important, so on and so forth, and other people there are not, right? And then as you start to draw that, you're like, well, if I'm smarter and spent all this time and did all this investment and et cetera, and proved that, you know, I'm this great thing, then I should earn more. And well, if I should earn more, then I got to continue to earn more compared to the masses of people who didn't go through the same thing, right? So you start gravitating again. And then you say that's just the doctors, and now you increase that or scale that across all the people within the really society. But we're just looking at healthcare, it would be just within the hospital or within that structure, right? And then you've got people that work to maintain the structure and work around it, and you've got prevailing wage of contractors and so on. And there's like a lot of just sort of inertia right there, just in the hospital structure and the ability to provide care. Okay. And since there was this competitiveness there where the prices kept going up, well, now you have to figure out a way to counteract that. And remember, we said that we were trying to separate ourselves from people who didn't go through this stuff. And so we charge them more because we believe we're justified and we're smarter, better, elite, whatever. And thus they're less. Well, those people aren't necessarily making more money. In fact, really that money starts to gravitate towards those elites, and thus if they make less money but we're expecting to earn money, well, there's sort of that disparity of potential. And so what's a way to fix the inability to afford stuff? Well, you create an interstitial layer. You create health insurance. Health insurance does not provide you care. Health insurance helps you afford that disparity that was driven from our cultural problem. And so it's sort of like a Band-Aid that we put over the top, and we're like, well, as long as this Band-Aid's here, well, then as long as these people can afford this, then this can afford this, and this can continue to grow, and insurance can continue to grow as long as you continue getting more people in, and thus more profits and so on. And then insurance realizes, hey, this is a bad game. If that's costing way too much, then we need to figure out a way to slow these people down from spending all our money because it just doesn't scale right. It doesn't help my profit if I've got to pay it all to them. Weird. And so insurance is like, well, we'll add a deductible. And since they can barely afford insurance, now they're not going to be able to afford the deductible to go get the health care that they just wanted in the first place. Like, nobody wakes up and says, man, for Christmas, I really wish somebody would get me insurance. Like, what? It might have happened over the last couple of years in the society, but that's sort of because we didn't really analyze the problem. And so all of our frustration has been driving towards, somebody needs to fix this problem for us. And we're not really addressing the problem of you have insurance, and insurance is a business. So it's still driven for profit. It's still driven for high performance. It's still trying to make money. Okay. And that whole business model is to make it so that you don't realize you can't afford the care because these guys are making more wage and driving that disparity in how much they make. And so it's a broken system, and we're trying to hide it with insurance. So the way to fix it isn't to make the government pay all the insurance costs. Believe it or not, that'll actually probably make it worse, because now you're adding another layer of extrapolation or another intermediate layer between what's actually going on and this finality of outcome of just getting healthcare, right? So adding the government in and making them do it just means that, well, now the insurance companies have sort of an unbridled cap to the amount of money that they can charge, and then the hospitals see, oh, well, they can charge that, and I'm actually doing the work, so I should charge more. And now they start competing with each other, and the prices will go through the roof. If you watch over the last 5 years or whatever since the Affordable Care Act what was passed, and of course now it's whatever, when it was passed, prices started going through the roof, right? And so everyone was like, oh, Shkreli did it, it's Shkreli's fault. Well, no, it's a cultural issue, and we haven't really addressed the cultural issue that's underpinning it. And so it's sort of a predictable outcome, which is kind of frightening, but kind of how capitalism is based. And so I think that the way we can fix it is, one, to stop saying the government's got to fix it, because that's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. It's functionally not going to work, because we won't be able to afford the taxes, because they'll be just as much as the insurance, in fact, probably more, so that the government can continue to get its taxes for everything else that it provides. So if we can't afford health insurance, then moving another layer in that also needs to make money and will have some waste or lack of efficiency to it means that you'll have to pay just as much over to the government, so that the government can pay these guys, so that these guys can pay these guys, so that you can eventually get healthcare. Like, adding more interstitial layers, that was the word I was looking for, interstitial. Adding more interstitial layers in that mix doesn't help, right? I think that the way we can actually start making a difference, or start having the right conversation, is to say, hey, can we reduce this disparity of cost and wage, basically, right? And so there's a number of ways to approach it, but it also starts with a conversation of having the right idea in mind. And I think that some of those could be, hey, could you afford to get less of a salary every year? Maybe it's just an idea. Don't shoot the messenger. We're just talking out loud here. Could you take and donate a day a week where you do volunteer, and whoever comes in gets served? And I mean, you're building a cost, because your cost is wait time or planning or being able to make it there if you're still at the bottom, but it's not an additive barrier of the financial cost. Instead, it's an additive barrier of a time cost, right? And so, I mean, there's going to be some cost associated with that, right? Like, giving healthcare isn't free, but you also have a sort of sufficient buffer in most cases from the healthcare that you are giving and are going through the health insurance and all that stuff, right? And eventually, if that would become a paradigm or the right conversation to have, then, well, ironically, I think it would draw down the amount of insurance that would be needed, or the cost of insurance, and then the cost of how much the care actually is. And so socially or culturally, we can fix a problem that the government is ill-equipped to do. Like, they can't increase the efficiency of dollar to healthcare. It's just not a tenable model in the American system, as it were. So can we fix it? Sure, but we have to move away from the word can't and move into how. And the how needs to be a realistic conversation with steps that we can take. I think the first thing is stop blaming the government for a cultural problem. Like, our culture is ours to have, maintain, encourage, or deflate. But it's very much a social issue. And so can't. Yeah. I went to a training today, and we were talking about sugars and sort of how to give up sugars, or how to reduce the amount of sugar that you intake. And some people get a bit defensive when you talk about it, which is fair, and some people are genuinely interested. And so there's a guy, he's a former Marine, great guy, and he was talking about it, and I'm like, well, yeah, if you give up sugars, then basically I lost 50 pounds by giving up sugars. And he's like, yeah, but look at, like, he was going to say, yeah, look at you and how skinny you are, right? And so I was like, that's funny, and it's interesting. And so I brought a visual aid. I guess it'll be how we close this one out. If you asked me, can you curl a third of your body weight? If you ask the normal person, can you curl a third of your body weight, right? I would say most people would, one, say that's a lot of damn math and go look for a calculator. And some would be like, nah, that sounds like a lot, unless you're a heavy lifter or you lift very often. I don't know if you guys know this, but I don't work out these days. I think that it's a perfectly predictable approach to solving an issue that probably has more to do with sugars than anything else. And so we're again trying to add an interstitial layer that helps to get to some outcome, which is a body, or what a body might look like if it weren't loaded up with a bunch of stuff that in moderation probably isn't bad, but in the obscene amounts that we consume in the American culture, which is like 50 grams a day or something, which is like 15 teaspoons, 12 and a half. So he looked at me and he was basically like, yeah, but then I'd look at you, right? Like, well, Jamie's skinny and whatever. And sure, I get it. I'm skinny. I weigh about right now I weigh about 170 pounds, which is just not good or bad. It's just my carry weight, right? And I think I've weighed this for a year or two since I really, really drastically cut back on sugars. And so can I curl a third of my body weight? Okay. A third is a lot of weight, right? That's 55 pounds, give or take. It's 53 or whatever. And so the short answer is, if I told myself I can't, then I'm sufficiently confident that I wouldn't be able to do it and I would never try. So my only workout that I really get is playing with my daughter, and I'll lift her up and throw her in the air and wrestle and carry her around the room, and I can hold her out at arm's length, which if you've ever tried to do that, just grab like 5 pounds and hold it out at arm's length, you'll realize that's pretty tough. So I don't look very big, and I'm not, I don't think I'm incredibly intimidating, but can I curl a third of my body weight? And so this is 52 and a half pounds, which is ironically just about on point. Okay. So all the plates are there. This thing says 52 and a half. And the answer is, well, yeah, I can. It's difficult, but I can curl a third of my body weight. And if I asked him, can you curl a third of your body weight, he would probably either say, yeah, I lift, bro, or be like, no, that's absurd. So the key takeaway is we should look at how to reduce the use of the term can't and start thinking about what you can do or what goals you can set to get any sort of finality of outcome that you want to achieve. And maybe that's feeling a little bit better every day. Don't try and transcend. It's not happiness, because happiness is not a destination. Okay. So what are the smaller goals or the smaller steps you can take to get to some place where you feel better, where you think better, where you believe that you can make an impact and you can make a change, and you start taking action to do it. Stop saying I can't, because all you're saying when you say I can't, again, is that you cannot surmise, oh, I'm going to have to read it. You cannot surmise that there exists a sufficient probability of outcome, and thus you've committed to not giving it a shot at all. Can't. So start thinking about what you can do and how to get to where you want to be. And it may be that you decide, hey, I just got the wrong target, and that's a perfectly reasonable spot to start from. I think that is all I had down in my notes for today. So thanks for watching, seeing some names I haven't seen in a while, which is awesome. And that was Ready, Set, Engage, episode 10. Hey, Captain Donahue, good seeing you.